James definitely says that sick people should call the elders to pray over them. But what does he say will happen when they do? This one might cause some debate. This is Looking Intently. I'm going through the book of James with these short videos, and to make sure you don't miss any, click the subscribe button and then that bell icon in the lower right. And if you have missed any and want to check them out or catch up on some, you can click the tag in the upper right. Also, if you like the video, be sure and let me know, let YouTube know. Click the thumbs up, leave a comment, share it on Facebook. I guess if you don't like the video, you can click the thumbs down. And once again, I'm not sure today. I think there could be some real debate about this. We're talking about James chapter 5, verses 14 and 15. He says there, "Is anyone among you sick? Let him call for the elders of the church and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith will save the one who is sick, and the Lord will raise him up." Now, if that's all we had, just that verse and a half there, it would be pretty clear that when you're sick, you call for the elders, they pray, and you get well. But that's not all we have. Again, you always have to look at context. And certainly the context here includes verse 13, right before it, where it says, "Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray." And we looked at that in the last video. If you missed that one, definitely check that out. But we saw that has to be taken in context, and the context for James, it's still always in mind, is chapter 1, where he says, "Consider it pure joy when you face trials of various kinds." Well, that means that if anyone is suffering, let him pray. We said the prayer there, it might be for relief of that suffering. There's nothing wrong with that. But it has to be for God's help, for His strength to consider it pure joy, so that we can grow in our faith and become mature and complete, as he goes on to say there. Well, think about it. Sickness is a specific form of suffering. James in chapter 1 talks about various trials. Well, that includes sickness. And so it says here, if anyone's sick, call the elders to pray. What are they to pray for? That same thing. They can pray for healing, but their focus is to pray that this person would remain committed in the midst of that their faith wouldn't weaken, it would be stronger, that they would grow and mature as a Christian as a result of this, and have strength to face the temptation of Satan to weaken a person's faith and their commitment. That's what's being talked about here. It says the elders are also to anoint this person with oil. I've heard several times in different places, different sources, well, that's like both ends of the spectrum then. The prayer is spiritual intercession, and the oil was the medicine of that day. So you do whatever is, physically available with medicine. I don't think that's the case, and the big reason is it says the elders are to anoint the person with oil. If that's the medicine, why are the elders doing it? They weren't doctors necessarily, and it doesn't sound like you really need to be a doctor to anoint someone with oil. No, this is talking about oil in the sense that we see all throughout the Bible, the spiritual significance of it, that it represents God. It represents His presence and His blessings. It was a reminder of those for this person who's facing something that, again, you've been there, I've been there. It can get you focused on the negative. It's a reminder of the positive as they're praying for that person to remain committed. Well, you might say, well, what about the verse 15 where it gives the result? It says right there, "And the prayer of faith will save the one who is sick, and the Lord will raise him up." Well, once again, you remember we said at the beginning of James, there's almost like a dictionary of James you have to be familiar with, and that definitely comes into play here. There's a few things we need to look at. First of all, it says the prayer of faith. And we've seen in James, and I'll put a link up here to the video where we talk about this a lot. We've seen that James uses the noun form and the verb form of faith very distinctly. Faith or belief versus believing, the only verb form that we can use. When he uses the verb, it's for mental assent. Even the demons believe. They agree that there is a God. But when he uses the noun form, translated faith, well, that's talking about commitment. Faith without works is dead. And so that's what's being talked about, this prayer of faith. It isn't the elders believing that God will heal this person. It's the elders praying for this person's commitment, praying for them to have that faith, that surrendered commitment to God that will help their faith grow, help them consider it joy and grow and mature. That's what their prayer is about. And then it says that prayer will save the one who is sick. Notice that word is save. The NIV says make well, and that's an interpretation, and it's wrong. It doesn't mean that. The word can mean that, but again, you look at the context, and the context definitely is talking about this idea of commitment, and the word can mean deliver out of danger into safety. Well, the real danger this person is facing, it's not from the sickness. The danger, as James has been talking about, is when Satan comes in and tempts us to weaken in our faith toward God as a result of trials and suffering and sickness. Matter of fact, in verse 16, James talks about being healed from sickness, and he uses a word there that literally does mean make well. He chose this one on purpose. The prayer of faith will save the one who is sick. And then that last phrase, and the Lord will raise him up, once again, that could refer to raise him up physically, heal that person. It also can talk about moral encouragement. And that's what it's talking about here. You take it all together. This is saying that this person who recognizes I have a need for the elders to come and pray for my commitment. The elders come and pray for this person's commitment. It's saying there that God then will work in that person. God's Spirit will work to encourage that person to face this difficulty, to face this sickness and this temptation that goes along with it. Once again, there is nothing wrong with praying for healing. But we're commanded to consider it pure joy. We're commanded to maintain and strengthen our faith to become mature and complete. So we have to pray for that. This all shows what we've seen several times throughout this, and you see it throughout the New Testament, the Bible. And that's the idea of having a spiritual focus versus a physical focus. I need to have a spiritual focus that says, even in the midst of this sickness, that I'd like to be gone. My priority, my focus is on God and eternal priorities and His glory, versus the physical side that my focus is on me here and now and my comfort. That's really what makes this possible. And so as we seek to apply this, ask yourself, first of all, do I realize how important context is? We see this all the time, but nowhere is it more clear than here. If these are the only verses we had, then you can see how they'd mean one thing, but in the context, they mean something very different than most people understand them to mean. And then, do I realize how important my perspective is? Personally for me, that's as important as context. That is my context. Is my perspective, my focus, my priorities, are they spiritual or physical? And what can I do? Take away this. Ask yourself, what's something specifically I can do to more ingrain that spiritual perspective, to see life through that lens? And of course, one thing that's always going to help is to read the good book like a good book.